May 27, 1940, Épinay, France. As German forces swept across France in their unstoppable blitzkrieg, British Lieutenant Jack Churchill stood on a watchtower watching a German patrol approach his position. His unit was surrounded. The Germans had superior numbers, superior position, and modern automatic weapons. Churchill reached for his weapon, not his rifle, not his pistol, his longbow. He notched a barbed arrow, drew back the string, aimed at the German sergeant leading the patrol, and released. The arrow struck the sergeant through the chest. The man fell dead instantly. This was the last confirmed longbow kill in recorded military history, and it was just the beginning of Jack Churchill's war. Over the next 5 years, Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, Mad Jack to his men, would charge into battle playing bagpipes. Capture 42 German soldiers armed only with a Scottish broadsword, escape from concentration camps, and survive being knocked unconscious by grenades multiple times, all while insisting that any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. His motto wasn't a joke. He was serious, deadly serious. The Germans learned this the hard way. Mad Jack Churchill fought World War II like he had time-traveled from the Scottish Highlands circa 1314. While everyone else carried rifles and grenades, he carried a claymore broadsword and a longbow. While others crept silently through enemy territory, he announced his arrival by playing March of the Cameron Men on bagpipes. While other officers led from maps, he led by jumping off landing craft sword first, screaming, "Commando!" at the top of his lungs. The British High Command thought he was insane. The Germans were absolutely terrified of him. His own men followed him because somehow, impossibly, his medieval tactics worked. This is the verified true story of the maddest, bravest, most eccentric warrior to ever grace a modern battlefield. The man who proved that courage, skill, and sheer audacity matter more than what century your weapons come from. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now, relax, grab your coffee, and enjoy this beautiful story. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was born on September 16, 1906, in British Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, where his father Alex served as a district engineer. The family moved to Hong Kong when Jack was 4, where his father became director of public works. From childhood, Jack Churchill was restless, adventurous, and utterly uninterested in conventional behavior. In 1910, the family returned to Britain. Churchill attended King William's College on the Isle of Man, then the prestigious Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. He graduated in 1926 and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment. At age 20, he was shipped to Burma. Burma in the 1920 was Britain's wildest colonial frontier. Churchill loved it. He spent his days riding motorcycles across impassable terrain, often across railway bridges by balancing on the rails and pushing his bike along the sleepers. He once drove 500 miles from Rangoon to Pune, India, to take a signals course. This was before proper roads existed. On his return journey, he crashed into a water buffalo at full speed. He survived, made it back in time for his next assignment, and described the entire adventure as jolly good fun. It was in Burma that Churchill discovered bagpipes. The regimental pipe major of the Cameron Highlanders taught him, and Churchill became obsessed. He practiced constantly, often at 3:00 a.m., much to his fellow officers' annoyance. When asked why he insisted on playing at such ungodly hours, Churchill replied, "Because that's when the sound carries best." Churchill also developed his archery skills in Burma. He hunted with a longbow, teaching himself medieval techniques from books. By the early 1930s, he was competing in archery championships across Britain, representing his country at international levels. In 1932, Churchill returned to Britain. Peacetime army life bored him intensely. He drove his commanding officers mad with his eccentricities, appearing on parade with an umbrella, "Because it's raining, sir," playing bagpipes at inappropriate times, and generally treating military regulations as polite suggestions rather than orders. By 1936, Churchill had enough. He resigned his commission and left the army. He tried journalism, working as a newspaper editor in Nairobi, Kenya. That lasted approximately 6 months before he quit out of boredom. He tried male modeling. His chiseled jawline and athletic build landed him several gigs. That was mildly more interesting, but still unsatisfying. Then Hollywood called. Churchill's archery and bagpipe skills got him small roles in films. He appeared in The Thief of Baghdad, 1924, as an archer and technical advisor. Later, he had a part in A Yank at Oxford, 1938. The work was fun, but ultimately hollow. Churchill was searching for something he couldn't quite articulate: adventure, purpose, danger. In 1938, Churchill entered a military piping competition at Aldershot Tattoo. He was the only Englishman competing against dozens of Scottish pipers. He took second place, causing a minor scandal. How dare an Englishman beat Scotsmen at their own national instrument? In 1939, Churchill represented Great Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo, Norway. He competed against the world's best archers with equipment he'd largely built himself, traditional longbows when everyone else used modern recurved designs. He performed respectably, though he didn't win. And then, on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war 2 days later. Jack Churchill, now 33 years old, immediately rejoined the Manchester Regiment. His letter requesting reactivation was brief. War has begun. Request immediate deployment to active combat zone. The army, desperate for experienced officers, accepted immediately. They had no idea what they were unleashing. By May 1940, the Battle of France was in full collapse. The German blitzkrieg had shattered French defenses. British forces were retreating toward Dunkirk for evacuation. The situation was desperate. Defeat seemed inevitable. Jack Churchill, now a lieutenant commanding a rifle company in the Manchester Regiment, was part of the British Expeditionary Force being pushed toward the sea. His company had been assigned to hold a position near Epinette, a small village near Bethune, to slow the German advance. On May 27, Churchill's position came under attack from German forces. His company was outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded on 3 sides. The situation was tactically hopeless. Churchill's commanding officer had been wounded. Command of the company fell to Churchill. While his men set up defensive positions, Churchill climbed a watchtower to observe enemy movements. Through binoculars, he spotted a German patrol approaching, approximately 30 men led by a sergeant, moving cautiously through broken terrain about 200 yards away. Churchill climbed down from the tower and retrieved something from his kit, his longbow and arrows. Men watched in disbelief. They were about to be overrun by Germans with machine guns, and their commanding officer was getting ready to use a bow and arrow. Churchill climbed back up the tower, positioned himself, and waited. The German patrol continued advancing, unaware they were being watched. When they reached approximately 150 yards, well within Churchill's practiced range, he drew his bow. The arrow was a barbed hunting broadhead designed for maximum damage. Churchill aimed carefully at the German sergeant leading the patrol. He released. The arrow struck the sergeant in the chest, penetrating deeply. The man fell instantly. He was dead before he hit the ground. The German patrol scattered, taking cover, confused about where the attack had come from. They heard no gunshot. They saw no muzzle flash. Their sergeant was simply down with an arrow through his chest, like something from the Middle Ages. Churchill notched another arrow and fired into the bushes where the Germans had taken cover. According to his later recounting, there were strange noises from the bushes, but no return fire. Whether the second arrow hit anyone remains unknown, but the German patrol withdrew. This moment, May 27, 1940, near Epinette, France, marks the last recorded longbow kill in military history. Jack Churchill had just scored a medieval weapon kill in the middle of World War II. His company held their position long enough for the main British force to continue retreating. Eventually, Churchill received orders to fall back toward Dunkirk. During the withdrawal, he fought a running battle against pursuing Germans, using conventional weapons because his longbow had limited ammunition. At one point, Churchill and his men were pinned down by German machine gun fire. Churchill organized a flanking maneuver, personally leading the assault. He was shot through the shoulder during the charge, but kept moving, killing several Germans with his rifle before collapsing from blood loss. His men carried him to the evacuation beaches at Dunkirk. He was evacuated to England, recovered from his wound, and was immediately eager to return to combat. The army, recognizing his aggressive leadership and complete fearlessness, promoted him to captain and began looking for a unit that could handle his eccentricities. They found the perfect match, the newly formed British Commandos. In 1940, Winston Churchill, no relation to Jack, authorized the creation of special operations units called Commandos, elite raiders who would strike German-occupied Europe, cause chaos, and tie down enemy forces. The Commandos needed aggressive, unconventional officers who could operate independently behind enemy lines. Someone recommended Jack Churchill. "He's absolutely mad," they said, "but he'll fight like hell." Churchill volunteered immediately. He was assigned to No. 2 Commando, promoted to Major, and given command of a raiding force. He began training his men in his unique style of warfare. At the first formation, Churchill addressed his new unit wearing full kit, battle dress, webbing, rifle, and a Scottish claymore broadsword strapped to his waist. "Gentlemen," Churchill announced, "any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." His men thought he was joking. He was not joking. At the next training exercise, Churchill insisted every officer acquire a sword. Those who protested were told they could find a different unit. Most stayed, partly because Churchill was clearly insane, but also because he was genuinely skilled, and his confidence was contagious. Churchill's first major operation was Operation Archery in December 1941, a raid on the German garrison at Vagsøy, Norway. The mission was to destroy German positions, capture prisoners, and gather intelligence. On December 27, 1941, Churchill's landing craft approached the Norwegian coast in darkness. As they neared shore, Churchill stood at the bow of the craft, bagpipes under his arm. He began playing March of the Cameron Men, a rousing Scottish military march. The Germans heard bagpipes approaching through the darkness. They had no idea what to make of it. Was this psychological warfare? A distraction? Madness? As the landing craft hit the beach, Churchill leaped off, still playing bagpipes. He played the final note, threw the pipes aside, grabbed a grenade, hurled it at the nearest German position, drew his sword, and charged, screaming, "Commando!" His men, energized by their commander's absolute fearlessness, or insanity, charged after him. The raid was a complete success. The garrison was destroyed, prisoners were taken, and intelligence was captured. Churchill personally led multiple assaults, sword in hand, terrifying German defenders who had never encountered an enemy officer wielding medieval weapons. For his actions at Vagsøy, Churchill received the Military Cross and Bar, Britain's third highest decoration for valor. The citation noted his outstanding gallantry and leadership, but diplomatically omitted mention of the sword and bagpipes. Churchill's reputation was now established. He was the mad officer who fought with archaic weapons and somehow survived. German intelligence began tracking him. They called him the English officer with the sword, a designation that suggests significant confusion about what exactly they were dealing with. By July 1943, Churchill had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of No. 2 Commando for the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky. His unit was tasked with securing key positions inland from the beachhead at Salerno. On July 10, Churchill's commandos landed at Catania, Sicily. Churchill came ashore in full eccentric regalia, broadsword at his waist, longbow and arrows slung across his back, bagpipes under his arm. His men had stopped questioning it. This was just how mad Jack operated. The commandos were ordered to capture a German observation post outside the town of Molina. The post controlled a mountain pass leading to the Salerno beachhead. Taking it would prevent Germans from calling artillery strikes on Allied positions below. The observation post was defended by approximately 50 German soldiers. Churchill's force numbered about 40. The tactical advantage belonged to the Germans: high ground, prepared positions, clear fields of fire. Churchill studied the position and made a decision that would become legendary. He would not assault frontally with his entire force. Instead, he and one other soldier, Corporal Ruffell, would infiltrate the town at night, locate the observation post, and capture it by surprise, just the two of them, against 50 Germans. On the night of July 12, Churchill and Ruffell crept into Melina. The town was quiet, with German soldiers occupying buildings throughout. Churchill had his sword drawn, not his rifle. He moved silently through streets, using skills he'd learned hunting in Burma, following the glow of German cigarettes. They found the observation post, a building on the town's edge with clear views of the valley below. German soldiers were inside, some sleeping, others on watch. Churchill counted approximately 10 soldiers in the immediate building, with more nearby. Churchill looked at Ruffell and whispered, "Right, I'll take the sentry, you cover the door." Before Ruffell could protest this insane plan, Churchill moved. He crept up behind the German sentry, placed his sword against the man's back, and whispered in German, which Churchill spoke reasonably well, "Make a sound and you're dead." The sentry froze. Churchill marched him at sword point into the building where the other Germans were resting. Churchill kicked open the door, sword leveled, and announced loudly in German, "You're all prisoners of the British Army. Weapons down, or my men outside will open fire." There were no men outside, just Ruffell, who was standing by the door trying not to look as terrified as he felt. The Germans, woken suddenly by a British officer with a sword and no apparent fear of death, believed the bluff. They surrendered, 10 prisoners. Churchill wasn't done. He marched the 10 Germans at sword point to the next building where more German soldiers were stationed. He repeated the performance. "We have your comrades. Surrender or we open fire." More Germans surrendered. Now Churchill had 20 prisoners. He continued this throughout Melina, building by building. Churchill captured Germans with nothing but a sword, a corporal for backup, and sheer audacity. The Germans genuinely believed they were surrounded by a larger British force. Why else would this officer be so confident? By dawn, Churchill had captured 42 German soldiers and a mortar crew. He marched them back down the mountain pass at sword point, with German prisoners pushing carts carrying British wounded, a scene Churchill later described as an image from the Napoleonic Wars. The entire operation succeeded without Churchill's force firing a shot. He had captured 42 enemy soldiers with a sword. For this action, Churchill was recommended for the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military decoration. The recommendation was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Order, possibly because High Command didn't want to officially acknowledge that an officer had captured that many enemies with a sword. It suggested their military was being run by lunatics. Churchill went back to Melina the next day. He'd lost his sword during hand-to-hand combat with a German soldier. He found it lying where he'd dropped it and retrieved it. "Can't very well continue without being properly dressed," he explained. In 1944, Churchill was assigned to support Yugoslav partisan forces under Josip Broz Tito. His mission: lead raids against German-held islands in the Adriatic to tie down German forces and prevent them from reinforcing the Italian front. In May 1944, Churchill organized a raid on the island of Brač, held by approximately 2,000 German soldiers. Churchill assembled a force of 1,500 Yugoslav partisans, 43 commandos from his unit, and a troop from 40 Commando. The landing was unopposed, but German resistance stiffened as they moved inland. Churchill, as always, signaled the attack by playing his bagpipes. "This time will ye no come back again," a Scottish lament. The partisans, who had never seen anything like this, watched in amazement as this British officer stood exposed on a hillside playing pipes while Germans shot at him. The attack became confused. The partisans hesitated. Churchill kept playing, trying to rally them forward, and then a German mortar shell exploded near him. Shrapnel tore through Churchill's equipment and struck him in the head. He collapsed, unconscious, bagpipes falling silent. When he regained consciousness, he was surrounded by German soldiers. They'd captured him while he was knocked out. Churchill's war was over, or so the Germans thought. The Germans, discovering his name was Churchill, assumed he was related to Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister. They flew him to Berlin for interrogation by the Gestapo, marching him through streets in chains as propaganda. During interrogation, the Germans quickly discovered Jack Churchill was not related to Winston. The name similarity was pure coincidence. Disappointed, but still viewing him as a high-value prisoner, they transferred him to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, a facility for high-ranking POWs. Churchill assessed his new accommodations and immediately began planning escape. Within weeks, he and another officer escaped through a drainage tunnel. They were recaptured near the Baltic coast, but not before walking over 100 miles through German-occupied territory. Churchill was transferred to a POW camp in Austria. He escaped again in April 1945, walking through the Alps until he encountered American forces near the Italian border. His first question to the Americans, "Is the war over in Europe?" "Just about," they told him. "Germany will surrender any day." Churchill was devastated. "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks," he later complained, "we could have kept the war going another 10 years. He immediately requested transfer to the Pacific Theater to fight the Japanese. He arrived in Burma just as Japan surrendered following the atomic bombings. Churchill's war was finally, frustratingly, over. After the war, Churchill remained in the army. He served in Palestine during the British Mandate, then in Australia, where he discovered surfing. He became one of the first British soldiers to surf Australian beaches, riding waves at Bondi Beach in full military uniform because he'd forgotten his swimsuit. He also developed a passion for sailing, learning to operate small boats in some of the world's roughest waters. When asked why he insisted on sailing in storms, Churchill replied, "Because it's more interesting than calm seas." In 1959, Churchill retired from the British Army with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, holding the Distinguished Service Order and Bar twice, and the Military Cross and Bar twice. He had served through the entire war, carrying medieval weapons into modern combat, and somehow survived. Churchill retired to Surrey, England, where he spent his remaining years motorcycling, sailing, and occasionally appearing at military reunions where veterans would ask to see his famous sword. He'd always oblige, drawing the blade and demonstrating medieval swordsmanship techniques to delighted audiences. Journalists occasionally interviewed him about his war service. Churchill was modest about his exploits, though he defended his weapon choices vigorously. "A sword is a personal weapon," he explained. "When you use a sword, you have to get close to your enemy. You have to look him in the eye. It creates a different kind of combat, more personal, more immediate. Fear works both ways." When asked if he'd been afraid during his various charges into enemy fire, Churchill responded, "Of course I was afraid. Anyone who says they weren't afraid in combat is either lying or insane, but fear is just something you have to get past. The sword helped with that. When you're holding a sword, you can't hide behind it. You have to commit." On March 8, 1996, Jack Churchill died peacefully at age 89 in Surrey. His obituary in the Times concluded, "Had Churchill not existed, it would have been impossible to invent him. No fictional hero with his story would seem credible." The Royal Norwegian Explorers Club later named him one of the finest explorers and adventurers of all time, citing not just his military exploits but his motorcycle journeys, his surfing, and his general refusal to accept conventional limitations. His sword, longbow, and bagpipes are preserved in British military museums. The sword still carries nicks from hand-to-hand combat. The bagpipes still work, though museum staff sensibly decline to play them. What Jack Churchill proved between 1940 and 1945 was not that medieval weapons are superior to modern firearms. They're not. He proved something far more important, that courage, creativity, and sheer audacity can overcome conventional tactical thinking. Churchill succeeded not despite his archaic weapons, but because of how he used them. The longbow kill at Epinette wasn't effective because arrows are better than bullets. It was effective because the Germans never expected it, giving Churchill's unit crucial seconds to reposition. The sword at Malina wasn't more lethal than a rifle. It was psychologically devastating. German soldiers, confronted by an officer confident enough to attack with a sword, assumed they were outnumbered and outmatched. Churchill's weapon choice was warfare as theater, creating an image of invincibility that broke enemy will. The bagpipes before every assault weren't military music. They were psychological warfare. Germans hearing bagpipes approach through darkness didn't know what to expect, creating fear and confusion. Churchill's own troops, hearing their commander play pipes before charging into danger, felt that their leader was fearless. If he wasn't afraid, maybe they didn't need to be either. Churchill's tactics worked because they were unexpected. In a war of machine guns and artillery, one man with a sword and bagpipes became a legend because no one else fought that way. He stood out. And in standing out, he became memorable, mythical, terrifying to enemies, and inspiring to allies. But Churchill's story is also a warning about romanticizing war. He survived largely through luck and skill in equal measure. Dozens of other unconventional soldiers died trying similar tactics. Churchill's methods worked for him in his specific circumstances with his specific skills. That doesn't make them replicable or advisable. What is replicable is Churchill's approach to life, refusing to accept conventional limitations, pursuing adventure relentlessly, and believing that doing something extraordinary is always worth the risk of looking foolish. Mad Jack Churchill fought WW2 like it was the 14th century and lived to tell about it. He proved that sometimes, in the middle of modernity's bloodiest war, what you need most is someone crazy enough to charge enemy machine guns with a sword while playing bagpipes. The Germans called him insane. History calls him legendary. Both were absolutely right.